Should I feed my pet grain-free food? You've probably noticed a huge trend towards grain-free diets. The topic of grains, and corn in particular, as an ingredient in pet food often comes up. Botanically speaking, corn is a grain, and no different than any other grains in its main composition. As with any grain, when too high levels are included in the diet, protein digestibility can go down. That is why we never see all-grain diets for dogs and cats. As a grain, corn has a biologic value, which is a measure of the amount of essential amino acids in a food, of 74. Muscle meats such as beef and chicken have a biological value of about 75. Now, egg is the gold standard for BV at 100, with whey and milk proteins just below that. When corn is combined with other plant sources, they can together easily reach a BV of 100. All plants, due to their cellulose layers, have decreased digestibility when compared to meats. But when cooked and ground up, digestibility is comparable to meat because the cellulose layer has been broken down. Dr. Jennifer Larson from the UC Davis Veterinary Nutrition Department says grains and any other single category or individual ingredient are neither good nor bad. Rather, what is important is how the ingredients work together to create the full nutritional profile of the diet. All carbohydrates, as an energy source, are used by the body the same way, regardless of their source. This includes grains, legumes, tubers, and different sources of carbohydrates. They all bring other nutrients along with them, such as fiber, fatty acids, and amino acids. It's important to think of food in terms of energy. Animals need energy to live. That energy comes from protein, fats, and carbohydrates. The question is creating the most efficient mix. So here are some of the common myths about grains. Myth number 1. Dogs and cats did not evolve eating grains and therefore cannot digest grains. So if you've ever heard that, it's a myth. There was a study in 2013 by a Swedish geneticist, Dr. Erik Axelsson, in which he reports that in a domestic dog versus wolf's genome, there are more genes responsible for the digestion of dietary starch. So, in other words, the dogs have evolved to digest starch better than wolves do. So when wolves evolved into domesticated dogs, they developed an ability to efficiently digest starches. Some wolves back then basically started hanging around by the human trash dumps, and any pet owner knows what this dumpster diving is like. These wolves ate all sorts of human table scraps, including starches, roots, porridge, and possibly bread, along with bones containing meat and marrow. No one knows for sure when or where the first dogs came to be, but most evolutionary biologists agree that the wolf probably made the first move and that the draw was the human food that was discarded. Only much later did people intensively mate dogs of different shapes and temperaments to create today's hundreds of breeds and varieties, from the large Great Danes and Mastiffs to the tiny little Chihuahuas and toy breeds. So the conclusion we can make from these veterinary specialists is that grains are good for dogs, and in fact, they evolved to eat them. Lots of veterinarians agree and state that dogs and cats require essential nutrients, and there are many ways to complete a balanced diet for dogs and cats, both using cereals or root vegetables or no starch at all. I do not think we have any strong evidence, though, at this point that suggests one approach is better than the other in general. Grain-free diets also lots of times avoid cereals, but they do include other sources of starch, such as potato, sweet potato, or legumes like beans. But this makes them usually quite high in fat. So here's another myth. Myth number 2. Grains are allergenic. Dr. Martha Klein is a clinical veterinary nutritionist at the Red Bank Veterinary Hospital in New Jersey. She says, at this time, there is no evidence to support that animals on grain-free diets have less incident of food allergies than animals on conventional diets that include grains. True food allergies occur in only 10 to 25% of all allergic dogs, and the rest of the allergies are environmental. And out of those food allergies, only about 1 to 10% of those may be to wheat. Historically, the most common allergens for dogs and cats are beef and dairy. Myth number 3. Corn and other grains are non-nutritive fillers. Dr. Larson says this is nonsense. They are added because they contribute energy and other essential nutrients, as well as very useful dietary components, such as fiber, which is an unappreciated nutrient. Whole grains are good because they help keep the fat and calories lower than if the animal products were used in their place. Even refined grains, such as white rice, can have beneficial health implications depending on the type of diet and the pet. The vast majority of dogs and cats are very efficient at digesting and using nutrients from grains. Many of the, quote, grain-free diets merely substitute highly refined starches, such as those from potatoes or tapioca, in place of the grains. These ingredients often provide fewer nutrients and less fiber than whole grains, while costing more. So that sounds more like a filler to me. I'm afraid that most of the recent grain-free diet trend is due to marketing at the expense of what veterinary nutritionists know scientifically to be best for our dogs. Some companies do it more than others, and the, quote, scientific companies resisted the longest. But even now, Hill's Science Diet has some grain-free, which is written in big font on their packaging. Recently, even a company owned by nutritionists has launched an entire vet line of kibble diets, all touting grain-free. This might be a great question for them. Why? Maybe there's some new research coming out that the rest of us don't know about, or is it just more of the same marketing issue? There's also an owner preference factor. Grain-free food has become popular for human diets, so many people think it's also best for their pets. The best diet in the world is not going to do any good if no one buys it. So if that's what it takes, maybe the pet food companies are giving in for the greater good and making grain-free diets. The real question is, how did this happen? Well, I'm sure a PR agency somewhere can track this as they can track trends for any industry, but I don't know for sure. One factor is the pet food recalls of 2007. They're probably a major factor that led to grain-free diets gaining popularity. The recalls were linked to tainted wheat gluten with melamine in it. Melamine is an industrial chemical used to make plastic that also registers as an amino acid on lab analysis. So the rumor was that this supplier, and possibly others, were artificially spiking their feed ingredient with this chemical to appear more nutritious. The problem is, when melamine is broken down in the kidney, one of the metabolites is cyanuric acid, which is a toxin. The end result? Renal failure in thousands of pets. This feed was distributed by Menu Foods, which supplied many brands of food. Almost 180 brands were affected at the last count.